the US federal government barrels towards a potential catastrophic default, hopes that the meeting between President Joe Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy will resolve their standoff do not look promising at the moment. While Joe Biden, on one hand, says that Congress must first ensure that bills due for past spending decisions are paid before he'll negotiate future budgets, McCarthy has retaliated and said that Biden must agree to spending cuts. Now, the US president, however, wants to reduce the budget deficit primarily through tax increases on corporations and higher income earners. By reducing the deficit, Biden's budget would reportedly save $330 billion in interest on the debt. That's what the estimates are. Now, the final decisions on what to cut to meet those limits would be determined by lawmakers as they write the annual spending bills. However, it should be noted that the Republicans have accused the Biden administration of engaging in reckless spending. They maintain that the House Republican majority was elected to serve as a check and balance in large part. More importantly, US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has warned, she says, that the federal government could run out of money by early June if the Congress does not approve a higher debt ceiling. What will this mean, not just for the US economy, but also the global economy, and what will be the political ramifications for the domestic politics of the United States? Let's try and get in a sense of perspective. And on that note, let me also introduce my guests. I'm joined in by Bernard Whitman, who's a Democrat strategist, joining me live from New York City. Bernard is a former Bloomberg and Bill Clinton pollster. Congressman Bob McKeeven, former Republican congressman from Ohio, joins us live from Washington. He was also part of the House Intelligence Committee. Thank you so much, Bernard and Bob, for joining in. It's a pleasure to have you on my show. Bob, Bob, my first question is for you. President Biden has argued that the MAGA Republicans are holding the economy hostage by refusing to raise the debt limit promptly. He also pointed out that they did not balk at doing so under his predecessor, Donald Trump. How do you weigh in on that argument?
Well, this is the standard procedure. As you know, members of Congress are elected independently. This president is elected on his own, unlike the parliamentary system in virtually every democracy around the world. So the majority party is also the party of the prime minister. In this case, you have a party in which the Congress is of a different threshold. And so when it was the agreement between the Democrat Congress and the Democrat president, they got along. When the Republican Congress and the Republican president, they got along. Now, when there's a competition like this is sort of standard procedure. It's happened repeatedly, and it will go up until finally they both give in and we'll proceed down the road.
You know, but the Treasury Secretary has also reiterated the importance of the Congress raising the debt ceiling. Why can't the Congress, in fact, pay heed to what the Treasury Secretary has to say?
Well, of course, the House, Republican House, has voted to do that. It took some of the more conservative members, they had to swallow hard to increase the debt ceiling, but the president wants it even more so. So it's just a question as to how much. And I repeat, it's really quite a molehill to consider. This is standard political practice.
Right. Bernard, I'm sure you want to add some thoughts of yours as well. But before that, you know, the US president is ready to discuss government spending, but in a regular budget process that's not linked to the US obligation to pay debts incurred by previous administrations and are approved by Congress. Many would ask what's wrong with that suggestion.
Well, look, I could not disagree with Bob more. The fact is, not only is Janet Yellen warning against this, the American people are warning against it as well. 70% of Americans, we can't get 70% of Americans to agree on anything. 70% of Americans want the debt limit raised to avoid default. I don't know, maybe it's because Kevin McCarthy is being held hostage by his own party, the Freedom Caucus. Kevin McCarthy is being held hostage by his own party. Maybe he wants to hold America hostage and the global economy hostage. I don't know, but let me tell you this. This would be a complete and utter disaster. Bob is underselling this tremendously. This would rock financial markets around the world, number one. Number two, Republicans can never help but overplay their hand. It happens every single time. I was Bill Clinton's pollster in 1995 when Newt Gingrich overplayed his hand, threatened to shut down the government. That helped elect Clinton for a second term. It happened again. Boehner in 2017, he was blamed for the government shutdown as a result of debt negotiations. Trump owned the shutdown in 2019. The
Right.
Republicans cannot help themselves. What we ought to do is have a clean bill. That's what 70% of Americans want, up or down in the debt limit, and then we can negotiate on spending. The reckless
All right.
attitude of the Republican Party is abysmal, and it's a shame.
Bob,
Shameful.
would you like to add to that? Also, Biden has said that he has considered invoking 14th Amendment to raise the debt ceiling. Is that going to be a workable solution?
Well, that whole discussion
I would think
is just silly.
that would be a disaster.
Let Bob speak.
As you know, when the Republicans were in and Joe Biden was in the Senate, he voted against raising the debt ceiling. And here's simply the way it works. Your daughter comes home from college and she's run up the maximum amount on her credit card. And she says, I want you to increase the debt. You say, well, look, sweetheart, we're only going to increase your borrowing power here if you agree to reduce your spending a bit. You're going out to eat 5 times a day. You can only go out to eat 3 times a day, and I'll give you an additional 5,000. That's all this has to do. There's nothing. The default is merely a silly conversation. We have literally trillions of unspent funds in the Treasury at the moment. Default is not a question. It's just a question as to the rate of deficit spending, and Republicans want to do a little bit less than the president wants to. That's all this is, and it will resolve itself as it always does. The idea that it's some tragic precipice is just silliness.
Bernard, while you do interject, it's important to also talk about the ramifications. The Treasury Secretary has already notified lawmakers that the U.S. could default on its debt by 1st of June. What would that mean, not just for the U.S., but global economy too?
It would send a massive chill across the entire economy, starting in Washington and going all the way around the world. And you better believe it's going to hit Delhi really hard. It's going to hit everywhere, every market, every country is going to be dramatic. Politically, complete disaster for the Republicans. I don't know what they're thinking. The McCarthy default is going to be the McCarthy's fault. Make no mistake, if there is an actual default, Kevin McCarthy will be held singularly responsible for this. It's happened. These types of situations have nearly brought us to this brink before. Every time the Republicans get blamed, I don't understand why he'd want to take that on politically. And by the way, it was just announced that 6 weeks from tomorrow, your Prime Minister Modi is going to be visiting
and that's true. Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
There's going to be a state dinner for him. Unless we want to have the Prime Minister and the President of the United States ordering takeout, I think we need to resolve this issue because this would be an incredible disaster for the American
I don't know if that's a joke or
Party.
something that India should be concerned about. But Bob, I'm going to ask you to, in fact, hold on to your thoughts before I come back to you, because it's important to, in fact, juxtapose both the opinions. On that note, I'm going to request my producers to play out the reactions. On one hand, we also have Joe Biden and we have Kevin McCarthy. Let's listen into what both the men have to say.
First, I just finished I thought a productive meeting with the congressional leadership about the path forward to make sure America does not default, emphasize does not default on its debt for the first time in our history. I'm pleased but not surprised to hear Republican minority leader of the United States Senate saying that at our meeting that the United States is not going to default, never has, and it never will. Speaker McCarthy offered a very different way forward. He's proposed deep cuts that I believe are going to hurt American families. Millions of Americans relying on Medicaid for their health care would be at risk of losing that.
I mean, I think as an entire country, we've got to have a conversation. There's not one thing that's going to solve this. There are many challenges here. And this has gone on too long, too hard. And I mean, we got to take the politics out of it. Innocent people are dying, and we're going to have that discussion. Well, the president tries to say, okay, I'll do a budget agreement, but the debt ceiling has to be just raised. Well, every way we do this, all the times before, is you do the agreement together. I tried to explain that to him. The president, when he was vice president, they were the Biden negotiations. The president, when he was senator, he voted against raising the debt ceiling. When he was vice president, our debt was $14 trillion. Today it's $31 trillion.
Bob, it's almost becoming a game of who will blink first. Why can't both, you're talking about two mature, seasoned politicians, why can't they both come on to a common page? Let's not forget that it's a tightrope walking, and the challenge of doing that balancing act is equally there for McCarthy as well as it is for Joe Biden.
Well, this is simply called politics. This is the way the world works. You don't just walk into a room and sign a document. You negotiate, and that's what legislation is all about. They wanted to do it at Easter time, and there just wasn't enough support.
You simplified it, but what's the cost of that negotiation? You're days away from the 1st of June.
Nothing.
Yeah, I mean,
this is what politics is. This is what politics is. If you have a dictatorship, then you give a budget and you answer it. If you have a negotiation, then you agree between the two. If they tried to do it at Easter, it wasn't support. The president didn't have support, so they kicked it until the July 4th recess. July 4th recess is coming up in a couple of weeks, so they set the new date. And if they don't do it here, then we'll do it in the August recess. It only works this way every time.
Bernard, do you think that Republicans are being hawkish? Bernard, gentlemen, let me speak. Bernard, my question is, do you think that the Republicans are being hawkish?
I think they're being incredibly irresponsible. I think they're being dangerously political with it. I think it is unnecessary. I think that the idea of holding the American people and the economy here at home and globally hostage to the whims of Kevin McCarthy, who has, by the way, like 2 votes to spare, is irresponsible. The idea that somehow this is how politics is, so this is how it always should be, is completely false. Americans are sick of it. They're disgusted by it.
Address it directly.
Why can't we get the job done? I don't understand.
Okay. If you understand the Constitution of the United States, responsibility for spending money comes with the House of Representatives. They have passed a budget. The president has done nothing, would not meet with them, and the Senate has not responded at all. So if anybody's responsible here, the fact is that we have something on the table passed by the House. The Senate has not acted, neither has the president. He won't until he thinks he's in his weakest position, and then they'll come to an agreement. Right. It only works this way every time.
Bob, I have a question. Now, we are talking at a time when there's also talk of de-dollarization, not just in India, but also Russia and China. And as we all know, that if this financial catastrophe does occur, the weakened dollar could also give a leg up to countries like Russia and China, especially.
Yes, well,
I mean, I think Kevin McCarthy is playing directly into
Bernard, let Bob finish, and then I'll, of course, come to you.
This doesn't affect that. What affects that is the irresponsible spending on the part of the president and involvement in a foreign war in Ukraine, in which 83% of all the funding is being paid for by the U.S. government. And then he has put sanctions on people that are using the dollar around the world. That is what has created the chaos that you see that is happening in Saudi Arabia and China and elsewhere, taking advantage of it. None of this would have happened had we not had this president and this incompetence that we're experiencing at the moment.
All right, Bernard, if I could have your views in on this.
Yeah, the idea that a Republican is coming on international TV and basically giving support to a brutal dictator in Vladimir Putin by saying we shouldn't be involved in that is disgusting. I don't know what happened to the Republican Party, who's always anti-communist, anti-Russian aggression. I don't know what happened to that. And the idea that we should somehow hold America's credit hostage to the political wills of the Republican Party, when in fact Kevin McCarthy has virtually no room to spare, just does not make any sense to me. It is not proper. And by the way, Donald Trump was responsible for the greatest increase in the debt ever. Why? Because he gave billions and billions of tax cuts to people like you, Bob, and me when we don't need it. So if you talk about who's responsible for
$6 trillion deficit in the first 2 years of this administration,
Donald Trump.
$6 trillion deficit in this first 2 years alone. That's
called saving the economy from Trump's COVID disaster.
All right, Bob, let's focus for a minute. Let's just focus on the political challenges ahead for both Biden and McCarthy. We all know that McCarthy is also being taken to ransom just so the Republicans ensure that slowdown in the spending. At the same time, we know that a debt default and its consequences could be disastrous for Biden's recently announced re-election campaign as well. What are the political challenges that you see for both of them?
Well, the idea of default is really just so much gorilla dust. The United States is not going to default, doesn't have to default. It has literally trillions in unspent, already appropriated funds. So that's not going to happen. And it's just this is part of the negotiating process. It's not going. Neither one of this will not be an issue in 3 months.
All right, Bernard, quickly, 30 seconds to share your thoughts. What are the chances that Congress could pass a short-term debt ceiling increase to defer the crisis?
I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a fairly last minute, in a week or so, an agreement to basically separate the two. We're going to have a clean vote on the debt ceiling, and then we are going to have negotiations. And Bob, I welcome that. I think we should have negotiations on spending. Those will be separate, as they should be. I think ultimately Biden offered to claw some money back that was unspent from COVID relief and the Inflation Reduction Act. I think we will get some compromise out of that.
All right.
I don't think that we should use the 14th Amendment. I think that sets up a terrible constitutional precedent.
I'm glad you say that.
But I do think that we will avoid it. But I would not put it past Kevin McCarthy, because the Republicans, again, overplayed their hand every single time and ultimately pay at the ballot box for it. Let's hope the American consumers aren't paying by a downgrading credit.